If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
Good one. So let's get to this nonsense, as I will call it, as 3 players are named as injury replacements for this week's All-Star game. Jalen Brunson, not one of them, despite how great he's played recently. Anthony Edwards, De'Aaron Fox, and Pascal Siakam will replace Steph Curry, Zion Williamson, and Kevin Durant in the All-Star game that's taking place on Sunday. There was no announcement for Jalen Brunson amongst one of these replacements. He did not make the original cut of players that were named to the All-Star game. The original 24 guys named 12 guys from the East. With the replacements, the NBA, I don't think really put out great information in terms of who's replacing who, but I presume that Siakam was replacing Durant as the Eastern Conference representative, because Durant, when he was in the East, was named an All-Star. So you lost an Eastern Conference player there. I don't think they've still said what they're doing with Kyrie Irving. I guess they're going to keep him as the Eastern Conference guy. It doesn't really matter in the sense that there's still there is no East versus West in this game. So, guys are just going to be drafted by Team LeBron and Team Giannis. So maybe it doesn't matter, but you would think that someone would have to replace him if he now becomes a Western Conference player, but that's neither here nor there. So Brunson left off again. You talked about how great Brunson's been playing. Are you surprised that the NBA, and this is an Adam Silver decision to be clear, Adam Silver is the guy who names the replacement for guys who get hurt. So he picked these 3 guys. Brunson was not one of them. Were you surprised that he wasn't picked?
I am. Listen, I'll give you some numbers here just because it really is important to note just how well this dude is playing. NBA announced All-Star reserves on Thursday, February 2nd, about 11 days ago. Knicks have played 5 games since then. In those games, Jalen Brunson's averaging 31 points, 6.2 assists versus just 1.4 turnovers, while shooting 59% from the floor, 52% from downtown. To put that efficiency in context, Brunson has scored a total of 155 points on 89 field goal attempts in the month of February. RJ Barrett has 98 points on 91 field goals. Among all players, Brunson ranks 30th in the NBA in field goal attempts per game in February, but 6th in scoring. He's one of only 4 players in the NBA averaging more than 30 points a night and shooting above 55% from the floor this month. The other 3 are Giannis, Joel Embiid, and LeBron James. One last number for you. This one I thought was really interesting. On the season, Brunson has a chance to become just the 3rd player in NBA history to average at least 20 points and 6 assists while slashing 48, 40, 85, meaning he's shooting at least 48% from the floor, 40% from downtown, and 85% from the line. So not the 50, 40, 90. That's kind of the hallmark, the benchmark for production, for efficiency. But you factor in the fact that he's averaging more than 20 points and more than 6 assists. Only 2 players in NBA history have ever done that over a full season. It's Larry Bird and Steph Curry, 2 pretty decent players. So,
yeah, they carved out a pretty nice career.
They stuck around for a little bit. So you talk about that production. He's 2nd in the league in charges drawn. And more than that, I think just big picture, think about where this team has been, not only last season, 37 wins, but for 2 decades, kind of rudderless, laughing stock of a franchise, point guard, no point guard to speak of. Brunson comes in, immediately changes the tone, changes the complexion, changes the direction of the franchise. So I think you wrap all that in. Could you make a case for Pascal Siakam? Sure, he's having a pretty good season, but the Raptors are far below 500. So for me, it's almost an easy decision to. I thought you could have made a very strong case that Brunson should have been named one of the original replacements. But again, we talked about positionality of it factors in when you're naming replacements now. And we'll see. It sounds like Jalen Brown might miss the game as well. He's dealing with a facial fracture.
Yes.
There could be one other player added in. Long story short, Jalen Brunson should be an NBA All-Star this season.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I was disappointed. Here's why I wasn't necessarily surprised, because I think when I hear Adam Silver is making the decisions and you pick Pascal Siakam, I see, okay, you're trying to get the Canadian market to watch this game, because it's not just Toronto. Now it's the whole country that kind of supports the Toronto Raptors. So you already got Julius Randle, a Knick going to the game. So New York is covered, even though Kyrie and KD are gone. You still have a New York player playing in this game. And I'm sure KD and Kyrie still have their fans in the city. But when you add another player, I think in some way you're trying to add a new market to the game. So, you add Anthony Edwards, who is well-deserving, a guy who I think should have made it from the West Side in the first crack, potentially. He gets in, that adds a Minnesota, market. Sacramento, they already had, Sabonis, so he was already there. So De'Aaron Fox, that was just them, I think, doing right by him. That was, I think, still the most egregious snub of all of them, even including Jalen Brunson. But to me, that's what this came down to. It was, well, we got to add another player. Who can we add that, is a market that's not being represented at the All-Star game right now? Oh, it's a whole country? Well, that makes it a lot easier. I know there are a lot of people in New York, but Canada is a whole country. And I think that they decided to put Pascal Siakam in there. That shouldn't have mattered. Like, to me, it should be on the merit of who should be the best players, who's impacted the season the most. But I think that's why they did this. And it's frustrating. Like, Pascal Siakam's had a great season. I don't want to undermine that in terms of individual stats. I mean, he's averaging 25 points, shooting almost 50% from the field. He's got 8 rebounds, 6 assists. He's a do-it-all guy. I mean, he had 50 at Madison Square Garden, so you got to tell Knicks fans about how great Pascal Siakam has played this year. But his team is not very good, and he is not being able to impact winning for the Toronto Raptors enough to keep the Raptors in the conversation for a playoff spot. So to put him in and not put in Jalen Brunson, I think has been one of the stories of the NBA season. I'm not saying he's the top story, but the fact that Jalen Brunson went to essentially a point guard desert, which was New York. They had a good point guard. You can say arguably since Stephon Marbury, but maybe you go back even further if you don't think Stephon Marbury was your cup of tea because the Knicks didn't win much with him. Like, they didn't have this man. It's a guard city that had no guards playing for their New York team. And Jalen Brunson goes on a team that missed the playoffs and looked like they were directionless last season, gets them in a position where they're fighting for a playoff spot. They've been competitive every night, and part of it, the main reason, has been his effort. The fact that they didn't look at and value that storyline in putting him in the All-Star game. That's what's disappointing to me, because that to me, Pascal Siakam having a good year. There are plenty of guys who average 25 and 8 who missed the playoffs, who missed the All-Star game. Like, it's fine. If he didn't make it this year, it would not have been a tragedy. I think, considering what Brunson has brought to the city, what he's brought to this organization, to not have that represented in the All-Star game, it doesn't make sense to me. Because the All-Star game should be a representation of like what have been the big stories of the season. Like, you want to talk about the players that played the best, who have had the big moments. Like, in some ways, it's a celebration of what has happened so far. I just don't see anything the Raptors have done or Pascal Siakam has done that just had to be represented in this game. I don't. If his team was better, absolutely, he's having a great season individually. But I don't see. There's no story to what Pascal Siakam has done for the Raptors. There's nothing.
And similarly, Anthony Edwards, the Timberwolves had some high expectations, trading, all those picks for Gobert, and were they going to be one of the top, 3 or 4 teams in the West, and they haven't been that. Again, you're picking nits because both of these guys have played very well. If you're going to put someone in, you want to take someone out. Personally, I would have gone with Brunson. And the other thing I didn't even mention, he leads the league in clutch points. Just the importance of it just lends to credence the fact that Randall, we know, cannot deliver in is inconsistent in the clutch. Let's say RJ Barrett has certainly had his moments, but it's not something you can rely on night in, night out basis. Brunson's been the guy. They put the ball in his hands, and more often than not, he's delivered. For me, I'm surprised he's not in there. That being said, him getting 3 or 4 days of rest is not the worst thing. We know about the minutes he's logged. We know about those are not typical minutes. He's as I mentioned, drawing charges, falling down on drives. He lives amongst the trees in the forest and gets knocked down plenty. So if he takes a couple nights off to go to Cancun, that certainly wouldn't be the worst thing from a Knicks franchise perspective, from a team that hopes to make a push towards the number 6 or 5 seed over the final 2 months of the season.
One last thing, there is part of me, considering this is an Adam Silver decision, there's part of me that wonders if anything involving the tampering could be why he held out Jalen Brunson. Because it's hard to say the league takes it that seriously, considering it's so rampant in the NBA. But they say they take it seriously. So could he decided, look, like I didn't like the tampering situation with the Knicks and Jalen Brunson that happened in the offseason. So Pascal Siakam, here you go. Could that have been a part of this? It wouldn't shock me shock me with the way the NBA works, and there's a lot of politics involved, and the Knicks haven't necessarily ingratiated themselves with the NBA offices for some of the antics of not just the tampering, but the stuff with the media, the headlines with the facial recognition. So like they haven't necessarily brought great headlines to the NBA outside of the Knicks playing pretty good this year. So it could be them saying, "Hey, you got one All-Star. I'm not giving you any more because you've caused a lot of other headaches that we don't really want to deal with." So that could be the case. You mentioned the Jalen Brown facial fracture, so I don't know why the Celtics would let him play in the game. I know I guess he may still play with the fracture, but that doesn't make sense to me. So you're gonna have to replace him, you would think. I mean, I don't know who else you're picking, especially in the East, that you would take. I guess Harden would be the only guy.
I think it's either him or Harden. But
and Harden's played really well this season. But like I said, I think they had their elimination game at the Garden a couple weeks ago, and then Brunson outplayed the Knicks one, and then they played a couple the next week, and even though the Sixers won, Brunson had his best half of the season in that first half. So I'm like, I think that Brunson really deserves to get in. We'll see if he does eventually get in, but as Tommy noted, Brunson getting a few days off, not the worst thing in the world. But I think that's going to wrap it up.